that David Hasmin has entered into the chat box to people. Hello. I'm Melissa Goff. I'm the superintendent. We're going to go ahead and get started right here at 5 o'clock because we know that time is precious, and we appreciate that you guys have agreed to spend some time with us this afternoon. We also know there will be a lot of questions, so we want to get through as many as possible. And we know we have our next parent forum at 6 o'clock, so we don't have time to go long. So we certainly want to start on time. So I would like to introduce Assistant Superintendent Lisa Harlan. Lisa, if you can just, I don't know that everyone can see you since we've got.
Yep, absolutely. Hello, thanks for coming. I see a couple of students on, so that's super exciting to see those faces this evening.
David, do we have anyone who has expressed a need for interpretation and translation?
This time, Superintendent, we have not asked. Would it be okay with you if I can make a general announcement?
That would be great.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Estamos aquí, el equipo del Centro de Bienvenida, para interpretar y traducir comentarios o preguntas. Si en este momento hay alguien que necesite los servicios de interpretación, nos puede decir hola o nos pueden indicar por los comentarios y así podríamos brindar ese servicio. De lo contrario, se continuará en inglés hasta que se necesite. Nuevamente, queremos tomar un segundo o dos para, por favor, si hay alguien que ocupe los servicios de interpretación, si nos lo dejan saber, quizás diciendo un hola o si quizás lo pueden escribir en los comentarios. Gracias.
Gracias, señor.
So it looks like no one has or is indicating that at this time, Superintendent. We can continue and then we can we'll check in back here in a few minutes.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So welcome. Again, happy to have you here. Tonight we actually have each of the levels broken out. So we're starting out with middle school so that we can answer really middle school specific questions. We know you may have more general questions. If we can front load the time with your middle school based questions, that would be great. Later tonight we have elementary and high school respectively. So if you have kids from multiple levels, you can ask those questions in the chat, but we are going to prioritize answering middle school right now. We'll try and loop back and get the elementary and high school ones if we have other students, other questions related to other grade levels of students. So how we use the chat box is for the questions themselves. So if you do have questions, it won't be a conversation tonight, just because we tend to be answering so many things at a time. And Lisa and the middle school principals and assistant principals and I are going to do our very best to answer your questions. When we see a question, we will read that aloud before we answer it, because this is being recorded so that other parents can watch this. Other parents who weren't able to make this time slot can watch this and have information. We really appreciate the district staff who are here, but rather than spend a lot of time introducing all of the district staff, because there are quite a few of us, I'm just going to say that I express my appreciation for the hard work that they have all done. It has been no summer for the team, because they have been working extremely hard to try and first prepare for teachers returning and then also prepare for students returning. And a lot of that has involved communication, has involved a lot of professional learning, and has involved a lot of meetings, some that are like this and some that are just a lot smaller, with the planning teams working together. The product that we have been designing that your students will be engaged in 2 weeks is going to be a much richer experience than what your students were engaged in the spring, when we didn't have a long runway for planning. We are fortunate to be able to have that now, and the team has just worked extremely hard to take a look at how can we accelerate students' learning, acknowledging that there has certainly been time lost with the design of the spring and COVID itself. So how do we accelerate learning for students so that they aren't constantly behind? And then also, how are we creating the environment to provide students the supports both academically and social emotionally that they need, given that this has been a pretty traumatic time period for us and still remains so, in that many of your kids want to be back in their schools with their friends and with their teachers. And we know that we want them back in their schools with their teachers as well. So, and we're still waiting on the metrics to get great for that to happen. Real quick overview of the metrics. We need to have 3 weeks of metrics where both Ben and Lytton County, or Benton and Lynn counties, long day, have meet the expectation of 17 or fewer per 100,000 cases, per 100,000 people be diagnosed cases of COVID, and then fewer than less than 5% of people diagnosed with COVID. So less than 17 per 100,000 people, and then less than 5% as well. That needs to be for 3 weeks running in a row with Lynn County and with Benton County. And right now we haven't quite gotten there with Lynn County. Benton County is on a good path. Lynn is also on a good trajectory towards reducing those numbers. So that's promising. Wear your masks, socially distance, practice good hand hygiene. And then just know we are watching as Oregon State comes back onto campus, how that might impact things within Benton County. We're certainly watching what's happening around the country with college campuses, and we're really hopeful that as Oregon State kids return to campus, that we don't see an increase in Benton County. So I see that your questions have started coming in, and I think we should just begin with a quick overview by Assistant Superintendent Harlan around the schedule itself. And then I'm gonna, for things that are district level or operational pieces, Lisa and I will take those. And then principals, if you can kind of step up and take turns answering the questions as we read them aloud to you, that would be really helpful so that we get your voices into the room and people are able to see their principals. So let people know where you are and take a crack at it, and we'll all help each other out in answering. Okay, we good to go? Thumbs up, everybody?
I think so.
All right.
So, kind of a few things just as an overview. In terms of the schedule for kind of parents and students, one of the things that we tried to do was give parents an idea of even, for me, even with my own children, like at what time should you be expecting your child to kind of be up and at 'em for the day, be logging in to have kind of that live time. So I laugh because we have started using synchronous and asynchronous, those two vocabulary words, more in the last 2 or 3 months than I have in my entire life. And really synchronous time to mean when the teacher is teaching kind of the whole class or whole group. Asynchronous to just mean that time in class where you might be doing either small group or you might be doing independent work. So when we think of how school typically live in person happens, you would have a 45 to 55 minute class period, and the teacher would stand and give you a lesson or a concept right in the beginning. You might do some practice together as a group, and then you might do some independent work and kind of get some feedback. So for middle school, we really separated the learning into the types of learning, meaning trying to chunk the synchronous times when students are going to be live with a teacher more towards the morning, and the asynchronous times towards the afternoon. There are absolutely other things that are synchronous that are happening afternoon, but really trying to get the bulk of some of that during the morning times. So one of the questions that we've gotten a lot is around instructional time at the middle school level, and does that mean nothing happens in the afternoon? And so a few things I would tell you about the afternoons. One, there's lots happening in the afternoons, and that will look different depending on the kiddo. So we know that there will be services for special education, for ELD. We know also that band and choir. And then also in the afternoon will be time for that small group. And so depending on your child, what they need, what their needs are for different content areas, that could look different. The other thing around instructional time or that I should explain about the schedule. My concern as a parent would be, and some concerns we've heard is, well, do we just go back in the spring to when school was closed and just kind of start there and move forward? And the answer is no, right? We know that that actually doesn't work in terms of catching kids up. And so one of the things that we've been able to actually learn from in working with some partner organizations, the New Teacher Project being one of them, is that one of the things we've done is tried to look at what were standards in the spring that students may have missed, and where do we need to infuse those in this next grade level before they hit or expand on that standard again, right? To kind of deepen their learning and get some just right instruction and scaffolds into that new learning. And so working with the language we use is how do we accelerate their learning through some of that has been really important work that's happened kind of over the summer. We've had some questions around instructional time, and actually I think it's tough because what instructional time looks like in terms of, do you just mean, you know, face-to-face with the teacher, or does instructional time count like when you're working with other students or a small group? And we would say, yes, of course it does. And actually the middle school instructional time in terms of what we call synchronous is the same or slightly more than it is for elementary in grades 3 through 5. But just how it looks throughout the day in terms of the type of learning will look different depending on the level of students. So I just kind of give that broad overview because the way we've structured it is different and it's intentional. And I would tell you that the intention is not for there to be less learning at all, but to really maximize some things in our favor, right? In terms of when kids work asynchronously, that they can work at their own pace, that they can get the level of support that they need, whether that's just a little or whether that's a lot. The time that they need to do that, whether that's, you know, a shorter amount of time or a longer amount of time. And so it will look different, certainly different than the spring, and it will certainly look different than what we're used to in terms of kind of traditional instruction, but it's certainly not meant to look like less. So Melissa, I don't know if you want to just start in on the questions. The first one we have is around what is being done about increasing the air quality in schools. In the board meeting, they mentioned MERV 8 filters, but scientists are recommending MERV 13 as well as portable air purifiers. Melissa, do you want to take that one?
So it depends on which school we're looking at. Our newer schools actually have the air purification that they need to have. So those that have been remodeled or recently built are already set with those systems. However, each of our schools has a plan on what they're doing around air quality. And I'm going to ask very quickly for our head of facilities to just jump on the line so that he can answer that question. So let's come back to that, and we'll go ahead with the instructional related questions. So the next is GAPS planning on providing instruction on all middle school math and ELA standards this year, as well as support students in making sense of the important concepts and skills they missed out on from last year? So Lisa talked a little bit about that. If so, please explain how that happens with only half a day of instruction. Do students have math and ELA classes every day? Thank you so much for clarifying.
So I can take that, or one of the principals can jump in. So I would tell you this, the amount of actual instructional time with like the direct instruction component with teachers, when you look at it from what it was before, again, a class period might have been some direct instruction, some small group, some independent practice that would happen in that same class time. We're simply kind of structuring out the direct instruction to happen at specific times, independent to happen at other times. The plan is absolutely to cover the standards for math and ELA, and it's absolutely to, like I said before, cover kind of those standards that build upon each other and prioritize what those are into the learning before they get to their the standard at their grade level. We know that if students don't have access to grade level content, they'll actually never master grade level content. So it's simply not effective to go back and try and remediate in that way. And I don't know if any of the middle school principals want to speak about kind of the math and ELA classes every day.
Well, Lisa, I'll just pop in, and Ken, you can join in when you feel. I'm Jody Didier, I'm principal at Timber Ridge. I just want to add that our teachers have been working in teams all throughout the summer, really looking at the standards and being super thoughtful about how we are going to help our kids catch up, or catch up is not the word we're wanting to use, but make sure we get them to where they need to be without, and not just go backwards, but really get them where they need to be and go ahead and continue the instruction as where it needs to be this year. So they've been hard at work at that and really looking at how they're going to do that. And a big piece of what they're doing is looking at what parts can they deliver synchronously when the kids are all there present with them, and then how can they create videos or different things to help support the kids as they do their independent work as well. So I know it's hard when you look at the schedule, you see 20 minutes. We aren't just expecting 20 minutes of work on math in a day. It really is 40 or 45 minutes, or it could take kids even longer than that to finish that work. So I think our schedule in some ways is misleading with those synchronous times up at the top together, lumped together. But there's definitely going to be an expectation that kids are going to continue that learning with support from some, there'll be some pre-recorded things, but also teachers are going to be available and pulling small groups of kids to help continue that. So I think you asked another piece, Lisa, I don't remember. Oh, about blocking, if they'll have it every day. And Ken, I think our agreement is they will be having it every day.
Right. So the question was, do students have math and ELA classes every day? And certainly there will be work every day. And then I'm going to go right into the next question, which is wondering about homework in general for middle schoolers. Do you expect homework beyond the Wednesday independent work time? So what's the expectation that parents can have in terms of kind of homework?
So that's a great question. And we haven't really dug into homework specifically because we have talked so much about what we'll be doing synchronously all together in their learning, and then what they'll be doing asynchronously on their own more independently. And I think that homework oftentimes would come out of what kids wouldn't finish in class. And so that's going to really vary depending upon how long it takes kids to finish that independent work on their own. I don't anticipate there being bunch of extra assignments assigned as specific homework, but there will be those independent things that kids will need to finish, and it may take some kids longer than others to complete those tasks.
So that's one of the things that I think actually provides an opportunity for us that we haven't had before in education, is to be able to tailor things more individualized for students. We know in a given class that it takes some students less time and it takes some students more time. And being able to get the level of support you need and take the time that you need isn't something we've really been able to be super flexible about in a traditional schedule, because the class ends after 50 minutes. Like, it didn't matter where you were in that work, it just ended and you left. And so having some of that time in the afternoon to be able to do that, I actually think is super beneficial for students because we can individualize more. So Eden says, looking at the virtual, and I think I answered this already, but looking at the virtual schedule, it's a dramatic decrease in instruction time. And I would argue that it's actually not, but just the way that the time is scheduled is different, because independent work time and small group time would have happened during the class time anyway. So direct instruction, synchronous, and asynchronous, it doesn't mean that learning and work is not happening in that other time. And then she said, are there any extracurricular activities at this time? So we know that for electives for middle school, it will happen in a wheel. The exceptions for that are band and choir, which are in the afternoon. And essentially those students are switching out some of the time that they would be doing independent work to do those things, which means some of that independent work will need to be done later. And for middle school, if I'm missing something, please pop in. Ken Gilbert, a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. Just a clarification, because I don't want to accidentally mislead any parents. The kids will be meeting daily in their block. That block could be, the math, science block, ELA, social studies, and wellness elective. That doesn't mean that there will be instruction every day for math or for science. Actually, the way they're planning it so that they can get a little bit deeper into some of the concepts is that it'll be in every other day. And so I don't want that to be misinterpreted. I think there will be probably some homework or some additional work during asynchronous time each day to some extent. But that doesn't necessarily mean they'll have 20 minutes of math direct instruction every single day.
Thanks, Ken. I'm going through the questions. So from another Lisa, great name. Does the school offer any kind of parental control software for home purchased Chromebooks? And is it possible to have school security programming installed on home purchased Chromebooks? That is a great question that I do not know the answer to in terms of kind of school I would have to ask more and get back to you all. But I think in terms of like the school district, obviously in our network, we have kind of a firewall. And when kids are accessing kind of like Canvas, for instance, through their school district account, their email account, all of those things will be in place. But in terms of like your Wi-Fi and your personal Chromebook, after they log off of their of Canvas and after they log off of their school district email, I don't think that any of that extends. And so you would be looking at some parental controls that you could put on the device, or parental control software that you could put on the device, or your own Wi-Fi at home. That would be also good for their phones and anything that access the wireless in your house to be able to control what was viewed. Amber, why are all kids not getting some instructional time in the afternoon? Why only band and choir? Shouldn't all kids get the same instructional time regardless of their elective choice? I can take that. One of the principals can chime in. So I would say a few things. All kids will be getting instructional time in the afternoon, but what that looks like could be different. And I would say that actually making sure that kids have the support that they need, however much or however little or whatever works for them, is what we would want. In terms of band and choir, so again, electives will happen in a wheel except for those two. There's lots of reasons except for those two, one of being which just the sheer number of students that tend to do those. And two, like I explained earlier, some of the work that that will be done during that time, those kiddos are going to have to do, you know, kind of separately on top of that. And so that's a tough question, not being able to offer everything in the same way. We did have to make some choices there for sure.
So I am going to ask that we actually, maybe we can take turns with the principals. So I don't want to, so Jody and Ken, are there any other principals here? Did we see Stephanie and Tristan?
Stephanie is on, but I think she had to switch to her school desktop because
Yeah, I saw Stephanie.
Okay, so let's just do the merry-go-round of answering, and you all can then just call on the next principal, and we'll definitely be there to help. But what I don't want to do is have something at the district level be shared that might be different than what is happening at your own site. And I think the example that Ken gave earlier is important to just note that there are some specific conversations that are going on by level or by your own school that I would hate for us not to be completely up to speed on and for you to get mixed information. So while we just kind of push pause before the next question, and I want to come back to the choir music afternoon question. So that's where I am. And Stephanie will let you take that as on next. But first I want to give some time for Debbie just to check in and make sure we don't have any parents who are
Sorry.
Buenas tardes a todos. Nuevamente estamos aquí para apoyar con lo que es la interpretación. Si hay alguien que ocupe los servicios de interpretación, pueden saludarnos, decir un hola o también escribirlo en los comentarios para así ayudarles con preguntas o comentarios que tengan. Gracias.
Thanks, David. So the next question is kind of similar. So I'll go ahead and read it. And then if Stephanie is on and would like to take that, or Tristan, fine.
And Stephanie is going to talk about the afternoon. Is that the question, the next question that's coming?
Kind of, yes, it is.
Okay, great.
So it says, my student is an average student. Why is it reasonable that he have class 3 hours a day? He is not music, not AVID, not in algebra, not in ELA. I think they might mean ELD. It appears he will get math twice a week for 40 minutes. I realize that he can drop into his teacher's office hours in the afternoons, but I'm very concerned about his lack of instruction in the afternoon. Also very concerned that his instruction is crammed into the mornings. What specifically is offered to an average student in the afternoons? Stephanie, are you on?
Mrs. Oh, sorry,
Yep.
go ahead.
You can take
Mrs.
it.
Hart-
I think she's having connectivity issues. She's just
Okay.
just asking if we can help. So
Yeah,
can I-
Jody, you can either way.
Okay. Well,
What Jody said was what I was going to tell you.
okay. So I, if I'm understanding the question correctly, just concerns about what is offered in the afternoon for all kids, and that some kids may be getting more options. So I think it's a struggle we have when we're in building two. How do we offer kids the right thing for each student? And it's been challenging to make this schedule because we're also trying to keep in mind a hybrid when we go back in person, and that we're not changing it too much. And so we've really wrestled with how do we offer electives and also not mix cohorts too much, and how do we make this work for students so they have some choice. And this is what we finally came up with that would allow kids to be in all of their core classes and experience that wheel, but also offer these pull-out type classes when we come back in person. And like I think Lisa mentioned this, in some ways it's going to add work for those kids because they will still have their independent work that they need to be doing in the afternoon, and it's going to take some of that time. So I understand how it could seem that your student wasn't getting as much, but it also is going to open them up to have more of that small group instruction time with their teacher in the afternoon.
So Jody, if I am the parent, and I'll just use the same wording of kind of just an average student in the afternoons, does that mean that I would have small group instruction time?
Yes. I mean, it's not going to start out that every kid's like assigned to a small group, but as we like get week one into class, we're having some systems put into place to really be monitoring if kids are participating and able to be understanding the work and turning things in and being present. We'll start setting up small groups to reach out to students that are needing more support. And then we will also have the option that kids can just have teachers available to help them as needed, maybe less targeted. But we're trying to really be responsive to kids' needs in the situation.
So your small group might look like a small group with students, and another small group might look like a small group intervention.
Yes, and we want it to be responsive to what we're seeing. So there might be a math lesson and you have, you know, a certain group of kids that are struggling with that concept. So you're going to pull those kids together for this week. And the next week, one of the kids is doing great, but a couple others need support. So we're trying to be responsive during that time and not just leave it completely open for kids to reach out for help, but teachers will also be reaching out and working with kids that they're recognizing need the help as well.
Thanks. Thanks, Jody. Next question from Lisa. Are textbooks online or are there hard copies of the books? Ken.
Sorry, I thought you said for Lisa.
No, it's from another person whose name is also Lisa.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, will hard textbooks be available, or will they be all virtual, all be online?
All virtual, as far as I know at this point. We have people in our district office who are working on the licenses and the access codes to the online versions of the textbooks. There may be a subject or two that I don't know this for sure, but there may be a subject or two that we're not able to get that, but the materials provided will be provided by the teacher, embedded in Canvas or in some way for the student to access it without having to have a hard copy.
And I just add, the reason for that is that years ago when some of these adoptions took place, so we only adopt textbooks every 7 years. So for example, we're up for a language arts adoption, which is, this is not a good year for us to do that. But at the time that those were purchased, there was not enough money in the district to purchase a one-for-one handheld textbook. So what were ordered instead were classroom sets, which is great if kids are going to the classrooms because the sets of books are there. But if they're learning from home, there just are not enough books to go around. So that's what's happening there. So we're able to, instead, we're looking at virtual. The next question from Katie is, when will algebra be provided at NAMS? Which seems to be a specific question for Stephanie. And since Stephanie is having a hard time getting on, I'm gonna hold that until maybe we can see her later if she's able to jump on. The next question is from, hello?
Sorry, Melissa. I was just gonna say, I think I know the answer to that just because we've been talking, and I believe their algebra is going to be through the morning. They're gonna have it scheduled into a rotation. They have the right combination of staffing in sections to be able to do that. And Stephanie just answered in the chat also, yes, in the morning. And I know they asked about NAMS, but for everybody here, algebra will be afternoon for Memorial. The algebra students will have those classes, math classes in the morning like all 8th grade students would have, but there's additional pieces to that that make them algebra qualified and ready for geometry in high school, and that'll be offered in the afternoon. At Calapooia, they are going in the afternoon as well. And at Timber Ridge, I believe it's afternoon, but Jody she's shaking her head, yes. So there you go.
Thank you. Next question I can take. If the student has their camera on, can the entire class see them or just the teacher? So if the student has their camera on, the entire class, just like if they were in class together, will be able to see them. The tools that we have, and we'll teach kids how to do this, allow them to put up the fake backgrounds that actually we could put up now for ourselves if we didn't want you to see the lovely painting behind me on my wall. So we will teach kids how to do that, and they can certainly block out behind them, but if they have their camera on, everybody will be able to see them. We will allow students, if they need to, for sometimes it makes kids pretty anxiety ridden to be public facing in that way, to turn off their cameras. So we will encourage them to have their cameras on. Do you anticipate that students will be able to meet state benchmarks with the less rigorous schedule? That is from Katie. And Jody, do you want to answer that one?
Sorry. I would say absolutely. Like I said, teachers have been hard at work, really working on the power standards and addressing what is most important for us to be focusing on in instruction this year. And I know that the setup is challenging, but I think our teachers are up for the challenge and that we are going to be providing kids with really rigorous instruction.
Thanks, Jody. And we're going to hop over to Ryan Mattingly. Ryan is our Director of Special Programs. And this question is there going to be any additional instruction or programs in place for students in special education classes?
Yeah, absolutely there is. It will depend on the student and the amount of services that they need. The way that schedule is going to work is the IEP team and the case manager starts with the gen ed schedule, takes a look, and to the maximum extent possible, we support the gen ed experience for those students with the support that they need. And if the team, including the parent, believe that a student's not appropriate, we'll talk about pulling them out of the class and doing special ed programming. But for the most part, special ed services are going to take place outside of gen ed scheduled classes. So it'll be in addition to and supplemental for, and we won't be pulling kids except in situations where the IEP team believes that that's the most appropriate thing for that student.
Okay, there is another question that is, can you share why there's no instruction on Wednesdays at all? This is from Allison Bryant. And Lisa, I'll let you take this.
So a few things. One, we'll have some check-ins on Wednesday, but Wednesdays we'll have a few things happening. Specialized services, asynchronous work will be happening, and then really just continued professional development as well for staff, just given the nature of schooling and how much folks are having to learn and having to implement. So a few things I would say. One, it doesn't mean learning isn't going to happen and work is not going to happen, but it will be asynchronous teacher-led work. And I was kind of scrolling through the chat, so I saw another question that was kind of similar in terms of, by my minutes, as I kind of look at it, it doesn't meet instructional time requirements. And I would tell you that the schedule for middle school, and this is true for K-12, does meet instructional time requirements, because what's required is both synchronous and asynchronous, and it's teacher-led activities, and then also what they call student-led activities. And so putting that kind of all together, and maybe we should put it in the chat, but there's a great visual actually on the comprehensive distance learning guidance that kind of goes over what that looks like. And so to be clear, teacher-led activities don't necessarily mean that teachers are in front of kids. And we all know, even being on these meetings for an hour, that's actually not the most effective way to learn anything, right? So looking and staring at a screen, trying to kind of pay attention and learn a new concept or skill, actually our attention span for being able to engage in that way is actually pretty limited, more limited the younger that you are. And so making sure that that kind of new learning is chunked is super important. But having kids on a screen for 4 hours kind of nonstop wouldn't be an effective model. But looking at the teacher-led, synchronous and asynchronous and student-led, we very well will meet and exceed the instructional time requirements. And again, the thing that's tough about this is, think about a period in middle school, right? There are 7 periods. Each period is a chunk of time, and it's not as if that entire time that a teacher is, hopefully, this would not be great instruction, standing in front of kids and just talking at them the whole time, right? So you introduce a concept or a skill, right? You might do some practice problems or some practice, and then you would have kids work on it on their own and then get some feedback. We're essentially taking that period and block and kind of separating it in having the kind of teacher driven time and then kind of the student work time so that they can get more support. But did the question you asked, Melissa, did I answer? Because I'm on the chat on another one that it was quite long but similar.
You did, yeah. Sean asks, when do the students get their individual schedules? And that's a great question. I'm actually, I am caught doing 2 things at once. So I am on the on a tech stream right now with trying to tack down when that will be, finding out from some of our partners who are working with us on schedules. So stay tuned, Sean. Don't let me drop that before the end of your call today. I expect to know that. I'm just afraid that I'll forget to loop back with you as we're trying to do multiple things at once, but know that I'm addressing that right now. David asks, when reading the Ready School Safe Guidance, the PM time in grades 6 through 8 seems to be more like applied learning, not asynchronous. Good point. Can you explain how the PM time fits the asynchronous instruction? That's great, David. Good question. Lisa, you want to take that?
So asynchronous could mean that we think of it in terms of sometimes a flipped classroom concept where you might be watching a video on a concept, or you might be reading something that you will then kind of the next day either with your teacher or with your class either discuss or analyze. And so that's kind of what we think of when we think of asynchronous. Applied learning, I think of, I'm going to take a easy example that I always use, like welding, right? Like you're going to have some kind of learning or skill, and then you are going to practice that kind of learning or skill in some kind of applied way later. I think that depending on the activity, you could probably slice it more than one way, to be honest. I think it will meet actually, it will meet, especially at the middle school level, more asynchronous than applied.
Yeah, and I would just say that a lot of applied learning is done asynchronously. So other applied learning is students learning together in small groups where the teacher is not facilitating the learning, but they are discussing what the meaning was of the short story that they just read and arguing with each other about what they think was the most salient point. that is applied learning. That is also asynchronous learning because it's not tied to what the rest of the classroom is doing.
And applied
So-
learning could be either synchronous or asynchronous, right? What you're doing with your learning, right? And how that looks, they're not necessarily dichotomous, for sure.
All right. Eden, just thank you. That was super nice. Appreciate that. Avery, the district template states math is 2 days a week, science 2 days, ELA is 2 days, social studies is 2 days. Did I read that wrong? And I think we talked about that definitely there'll be at least 2 days, and that there may be other times where direct instruction is also happening in those classes. There certainly is likely they will have homework in more than those 2 days a week of classes.
And just remember that those are blocked together. Language arts, social studies blocked together, math and science blocked together in this schedule. And that's not really atypical in other places in terms of having kind of thematic content, but yeah, that's what that looks like.
So Amber Bending asks, and I think this is a great question, and I actually am wondering, Lisa, if you're able to bring up you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'll try and link it in the chat.
Okay, so there's a really great visual here of asynchronous and synchronous learning. And so Amber, let me read Amber's statement for those of you who are on the phone. Guidance provided to me by the district said that the Oregon Department of Education has said that 4th through 8th grades should have 2 hours and 30 minutes per day and or 12 hours and 30 minutes per week of instruction. What you have laid out does not meet either of these, with no school on Wednesdays and less than 2.5 hours instructional time with the breaks. Please explain this to me. So what Lisa will share with you in the comments is actually how ODE described that instruction. So they do not want all of that instruction to be large group direct instruction facilitated by a teacher. They want to make sure that at least 50% of that instruction is the applied learning that is happening during those asynchronous times that we were discussing. So, so we definitely took that into mind as we were planning and planned accordingly. I know that that's a tough concept to be thinking about when you're having kids apply the skills that they've learned, but one of those things is math problem solving and doing the applied mathematics problems within the investigations coursework or the other mathematics or in middle school, the other mathematics curriculum that they're working on. So that time from ODE, that 2.5 hours a day or 12 hours, 30 minutes per week, that is based on the minimum that ODE wants to make sure that districts have for those grade levels across those two areas. Roselia is in Spanish, inviting people to ask questions. And then I did put Doug Pigman's contact information in here. Doug actually works from 6 in the morning to whatever that calculated daytime would be. And he was already offsite with his family at a dinner with his wife. So if you could just enter into, or with his family, with his email address, ask him the question. I posted it for everybody to see. So as many of you who have questions, this is really about the air quality question that came in earlier. So if you have questions about air quality or improvements that are being done at the school sites around custodial and other sanitization efforts, those are good questions to send to Doug. We can answer a lot of those ourselves, and we'll try to where we definitely know, but with something as when you're talking about 8 versus 13 of a certain clean air, I'm not going to be able to answer that clearly for you. How much consideration was given to parents who are still working from home? Work takes our broadband service, and adding additional screen time for 2 middle school kids will tax it even further. Was that even a consideration? Yeah, so that question comes from Christopher, and I will just share that yes, that was a huge consideration. We have many families who did not have broadband when school let out in March, and so we are hyper concerned about the amount of bandwidth that families will need. We do have strategies that we will be asking folks to be using when they are on during the synchronous times together, but it is another reason why this logging on and logging off actually helps us. So as students log on together in a synchronous manner, we'll have groups of students who are doing that in 6th grade. We will also have other groups of students who aren't logging on across the system at that exact same time, and that's a part of the design. Now, kids will still all be learning contiguously and throughout that time period, but they might not be online at all for some of that time period. We're very aware of that. We also have been working with our internet service providers to provide service in areas that did not have service. They have been really working well with continuing to expand their discounts for families who can't afford service. We have been sharing any resources that we have. We've been purchasing a lot of different tech pieces for students to be able to lock into internet from wherever they're located. So we are really aware of the bandwidth issue. We know that that is a significant issue for those of you who are working from home, and we have been talking about how are ways that we can save the bandwidth. The other way that we can save bandwidth is when we are in conversations that we don't need to see the whole class. Everybody can turn off their camera and we can just have the teacher instructing. It helps just clear some of that out. And the reality is, this is not ideal. We are in a situation that is a pandemic where we are not going to be able to meet all of those pieces that we want to be able to provide. And it's super, super frustrating for us. It's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for us at the administrative level. It's frustrating for the teachers. And what we're trying really hard to do is make it as least frustrating for kids as we can across all of these different areas of your questions, realizing that that this is just an unprecedented time, and we're going to do the very best we can to make sure that every kid gets what they need to be successful. So I do apologize for the broadband, how much tension that's going to put on your broadband, and I want to acknowledge that. How will group projects and assignments work? Jody, I think it's your turn.
Okay, well, through the platform we're using, Canvas, it allows us to assign kids different projects and activities. And between that and Zoom, kids will be working together to do group projects, and then they would be turning those assignments in through Canvas, just like they would be turning in individual assignments. So it would be up to the teacher and how they would assign and then pair kids up to do that type of work.
Thank you. We parents have visibility of attendance and participate. Will parents, I think is the question, will parents have visibility of attendance and participation in the synchronous sessions? My kids will be alone at home, so we want to be sure he attends on time, etc. So Ken.
So the first part of the question, can you read that again?
Yeah, will parents be able to see when kids are attending school and participating in the synchronous sessions, because they won't necessarily be home, they'll be at work?
Gotcha. So each period throughout the day, the teachers will take attendance during the synchronous time in the morning, and that is done through our grade book. Actually, I think it can be done in Canvas also. I don't know the grade book part of Canvas yet, so I don't want to speak too much to that part. But one of the settings that we have in our grade book that we use in Albany is that parents can be notified if a student is marked absent. And so that's a setting. Parents can go into the PIV and mark that setting so that they get notified if their child is marked absent.
Thank you. We did have a request just for those of us who are educators. Let's remember that when we use terms like in the wheel or acronyms, that not everybody lives in our world. So we just need to explain this.
And just so you know, Melissa, Carrie has been in the chat answering some of those questions. And so some answered already in the chat, and those visuals Andrew posted as links in the chat from before as well.
Thank you. So Lisa, if Carrie has been answering, can you pick up where where we are now? I know we've got.
Yeah, and I'll try and kind of go through quickly some of the questions and the answers just for the good of the whole group if they're not looking at the chat. So somebody said, I heard you mention choir. Is this an option? Yes, it is. Let's see. Somebody says, is AVID happening? Yes. Carrie explained in the chat what the wheel means in terms of electives. Somebody asked, when we go back to hybrid at some point, how does this schedule roll to a hybrid schedule? There will have to be some changes. And likely too, when we get to the hybrid, there may be folks who aren't ready for their children to go in person based on whatever the state of the world is at that time, and the opposite. Some people who have said, hey, we are at Albany online, and then in person's available, and they might say, forget it, no, I need my kid to go to school. And I totally get that too. So we know that there's going to have to be some adjustments, and we anticipate that. But one of the questions later on in the chat that talks about, well, why would you have a science teacher teach math or a math teacher teach science? So we talked about the schedule blocking like ELA and social studies together and it being one teacher, math and science being together and being one teacher. And the reason for that is when we go back to hybrid, we actually can't have cohorts of more than 100 students. So part of the guidelines that we have from the state is making sure that kids are not exposed to groups that are over that number. So when trying to make a schedule now so that kids have the same teachers, we have to do that. That's the only way that we're able to do that and keep those cohort sizes under 100. And so that was an additional challenge. And so I know that, hats off to our teachers, we're causing some of them to really stretch beyond what they have done before. And in an effort to meet the guidelines to be able to even be back in person as soon as we're able, that was one of the requirements. I am looking through.
I've got a couple. If your internet goes down, how will your students get caught up on what they missed? Well, one of the things we're doing is we are recording every lesson. So your child will be able to get into Canvas and access the recording of the lesson itself. So they should be able to get caught up on what it is that they miss in class. And another question is, if you have an internet issue at your house, how do you excuse the student from the class they may have missed? And just like you normally would. So you can email the teacher or you can contact the school. And then there's a question about, will Pinnacle still be used for grades? And Lisa, can you take that one?
Yeah, and there's another question about Google Classroom. So the platform that we'll use for middle schoolers is called Canvas. And we're using it because there are a lot more features, and we'll be using that system 3 through 12. And so you'll be able to see like their work, their assignments, and even the scores on those assignments in that same platform. And so we will have, and I think we already do, but we'll have kind of video tutorials and how-tos, not only for students, but also for parents and how to access those things. The students actually will probably learn pretty quickly, but they'll know, and we'll have support available to kind of walk parents through kind of that platform and how to use it and see what the assignments are and see what the grades are.
I'm scrolling from the bottom up.
Okay, and I'm going from the top down, so maybe we'll meet in the middle.
That would be the hope. My child has ADD and especially struggles with math. She does not, but could or should have a 504, or what the form is. It's a 504. Should we get this done to help ensure she is successful with math in this virtual environment? So you really have two questions in one there. So one is just, in any type of educational circumstance, would your child have needs based on the impact of their ADD? And that is a conversation for you to have with your school's teacher. And I would recommend the math teacher and the counselor would be the two good places to start there. And if that is true, then the next step would be to request an opportunity for a 504 review, a meeting, to see if about what next steps you need to take for your child. And that will be individual for every
child. So Eden asks, will classes be taped so your child can watch them later? Yes. Also, this might be super helpful. I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes when I help my own child, I don't know anything, right? Because I'm just his mom and that's not how his teacher explained it and I'm not doing it right. So it'll be super helpful for me to go back and watch it with my child again to say, okay, no, right? Like this is how they explained it. This is what it looks like. This is what it, and helping them do some of their work. So that will be available for kids, but also for parents too, who are helping their kiddos. If you're at the stage of life where your kiddo is pretty sure you don't know anything. That's kind of where we're at. We did
Middle school open houses are September 10th.
Is that right, Ken, Jody, Jordan? September 10th are open houses for all elementary and middle schools, I believe.
That's correct. The rough range is from 5 to 7 o'clock, but like at Memorial, we changed ours from 5:30 to 6:30 because some of our feeder schools are starting at 6:30. So we changed the time slightly, and some of the other schools might have done that as well, but it's roughly a 5 to 7 time frame.
Great, thank you. And so some of the individual questions that you have, either specific to your child or specific to your school, those are a great time to get some of that information.
I am sharing in the comment section a link to a document that we have that has a lot of the common technology questions. So I've seen kind of a thread of technology questions. How will we learn about Canvas? How will we learn as parents? How will our kids learn? This is a really great document. I would just recommend that you copy and paste that into a web browser and take a look at it at your leisure. It's both in English and in Spanish. So if you know people who either speak English or Spanish and who may have the same questions, please be sure to share that.
And so there are 2 more questions, I think, and then we're going to have to transition. Thank you, Laura, for repeating the question. I know in the chat sometimes we got lost through those, so thank you. It says, can you explain how kids will actually get help with individual issues that they may have in understanding? What are they supposed to do with their studies or assignment? Sorry, I don't understand how the whole virtual classrooms will work. So if Ken or Jody can answer how kids get help with their either individual issues or understanding their studies or assignment.
Sure. I was waiting to see if Jody was going to unclick. We are each school is setting up their learning pod teachers. So basically, as they go through their morning, they'll have 3 teachers for their synchronous time, and those 3 teachers will be set up with each other in a room, a virtual room that the students can access in the afternoon, along with hopefully some additional SEA support, a different, more adult support. But the specialist for the subjects will be there. And then if a student logs into that room, if it's a math question, then the math teacher can break off with them to what we call a breakout room and work with them on their questions. Or if there's several several students, which we anticipate happening with some things, we'll schedule a small group instruction for the concept. But that's probably the main way that they'll be able to get access to help.
And then the last one, I know we have 2 minutes left, and that's around dual immersion. And how do dual immersion classes fit into the schedule? So I don't know if Heather, Ken, or Jody has information on that, or if Stephanie is able to. I saw her in the chat, so I don't know if she was able to connect. Heather, go.
I can tackle that. We have the program at North Albany Middle School and Calapooya only. So those are the 2 programs that we're looking at. And the principals are working the bilingual education program into the non-core subject times for students, depending on the class size numbers. So parents can contact each principal to look at and, to learn what those schedules are, but that's where you have the afternoon available or some morning time available before their first core subject. But we didn't want to pull them from any of their morning groups for that, but it will be offered and supported.
Okay, and I'm going to do this last one because Megan said she repeated it and she doesn't feel like it's ever been answered. So will they have math and ELA instruction every day? So remember what Ken said earlier in that it's blocked, so they'll have ELA and social studies. So they might not get a new ELA lesson or new ELA concept every day, but they'll have that class and they'll be with the teacher who is teaching both of those. But it won't necessarily look like a separate ELA lesson every day. It might be either continuing work, or especially in the instance of ELA and social studies, there are very few things in social studies that you learn without having to read and write. So math and science might be a little bit more separate. And then she says, why is the middle school schedule so drastically different from the elementary schedule and high school schedule? Our middle school students, so I would say it looks different just because every level has kind of different needs. High school, we have to make sure they have credits in very specific areas to meet graduation requirements. And for elementary, it actually kind of looks similar, except they have some small group reading and then some whole group and some small group and some whole group. And then our middle.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. So it's 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And I know this is just not scratch the surface of the number of questions that you have, and know that your open houses are next week. So you're going to have more opportunity with a smaller group because it'll just be folks from your school.
And Carrie got on the chat to answer some more questions, or to give some more answers for there. So thanks, Carrie, for that.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. I really appreciate that. To get on and look. I would ask you, we're letting in high school or elementary school. We're letting in the next group of parents right now. But what I do want to let you know is there's been a lot of questions about the middle school schedule, and I honestly believe it's because the way that the applied learning and asynchronous time is blocked makes the schedule and the amount of time that kids are getting direct instruction look very, very different. And I just went back through and added up the times at each of the levels. And I just want to assure you that that those numbers are in alignment with each other. And it's in some cases the middle school kids have a little bit more time. And the feeling, I understand what you're saying, is not having that asynchronous time directly following the direct instruction is different, and that it is different. And part of the struggle that we have is wanting to make sure that we're able to afford our students this opportunity for enrichment and electives in the afternoon. It means about 50% of our teachers teach those exact elective classes that happen in the afternoon, which really impacts how we can offer the rest of the schedule in the morning. And we are working to make sure that your kids get the instruction that they need. There has been a great deal of thought and study about how to do this. And I appreciate that you're trusting us with your kids. I appreciate that it feels new and different and scary. And I want you to know that our expectation is that kids are thriving in the work that we do. It's not that they will thrive immediately, because everybody is going to have a bumpy road for the first week to 10 days of getting into this work. If they're still having a bumpy road a month or 4 or 5 weeks in, we need to adapt and adjust, and our team has discussed that. So I want you to also know that this is not a stagnant situation that we are entering, and we have put a lot of time, thought, and study around how to implement this for your students. So thank you for trusting us. Thank you for pushing us in our thinking and challenging that. I think that helps us think differently and be better. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Go ahead and stay on if your kids are also in this next group of kids and parents that we're going to be working with. Welcome any new parents that have just joined us. It'll take us a little while to switch over to this new set of parents because we have to admit people in one by one. So if I recognize that it's a few minutes after 6 o'clock. Normally we're trying to stick right on time. We just had a few more questions in our first group than we were ready to answer. And so we weren't quite able to get through them all. But I believe from looking at who I've got on the line that we are entering the high school group right now.
We are, and we are running late because I was trying to squeeze in an extra one at the end. So sorry.
I know. Did you see how I robbed you?
You did. You did a really good job. Really.
So welcome everybody.